Okay, so I'm on hour 7. It's like what, 2:30 a.m. right now, and like the amount of like roadkill and like not even just like small like animals. Like I've seen like 3 deers and like I think a moose. I'm not even sure if there's mooses around here, but they're huge. And like every time I see one, I'm like, oh my god, that's just like the worst. And I'm just like here driving and I see one coming up. I'm like, oh god, I gotta like go into the next lane because I don't want to like drive through it. And it's just like crazy. And I've been trying to like, I'm not tired. I am a little bit tired, kind of like dying down right now, but it's an okay trip. I mean, like, one of the cool things is like it's kind of like there's no lights anywhere around like most of the time, so it's like you can see the stars really really well. I remember I pulled over when I went to get gas and stuff like that, and I was able to actually see like the stars and stuff like that, and I saw like Orion and Orion's belt and stuff like that. I was like, oh my god, like you can literally see it like almost like super clear. I mean, there's still a little bit of light pollution, so like I can't see like the Milky Way galaxy, like the kind of cloudiness of it, but it was still freaking amazing. I'm like, I really want to go into like an area or like go camping somewhere where there's like no lights whatsoever for like miles around, and like just look up at the stars. Like that's literally what I want to do next, and I can't wait to like do that whenever that's possible. My only fear with that is like being in the, like, that means you're in the middle of nowhere, and that's scary in general, because it's like, oh, if something happens, no one's around. That's literally the start of any horror movie. Oh, any horror movie set in like the forest. It's like, oh, they were going camping and they didn't tell anyone, and then they get murdered, or oh, there's like a serial killer on the loose and no one knows about it, and like stuff happens. So it's like, oh yeah, that's literally the premise of a horror movie, and I feel like I've seen enough horror movies to know where like that would go if I ever did that, but I'm still really interested in doing it. So yeah, but I'm like really starting to come down. Like I'm starting to get tired. I got a couple of like energy drinks just to try to keep me up. They're helping, but I think in like maybe like 2 or 3 hours, I'm just gonna pull over somewhere and just take like a quick nap. And I mean like on like not on the side of the road, but like a place where I can actually park for a bit and just like knock out. I honestly don't know the logistics of that. Like I don't know if that's illegal to do or not illegal to do. I don't see why it would be, but like whatever. If like someone calls the police and be like, oh, there's someone sleeping in their car, I'm just gonna be like, I'm on a road trip. I just need sleep because I am tired. And like I don't want to spend money on a hotel if I'm just gonna sleep for like 2 or 3 hours, because I mean that would be kind of really pointless. I only need like 3 hours essentially, or like an hour and a half, and it should be like ready to go for like the rest of the day. But oh no, it's been a fun trip. I mean, I finished listening to an audiobook that I've been trying to read. I've been reading the book. I got like halfway through it, and I actually was able to finish the book by listening to it on audiobooks. Really great. There's another book that I wanted to start reading, but that one's like 26 hours. So this trip is not long enough for that. That's something I'd have to like actually grab the book and read it instead of like listening to the audiobook. Because I mean, I got the audiobook for that reason, but I didn't realize how long it was. And that's something like I don't want to listen to, because then I'll feel the need to like continue listening to it, and that's 26 hours that like there's no way I can do that. I mean, yeah, I could do that, but there's no way I'd want to do that. And like reading a book, like you can stop whenever you want and pick it back up, and you don't feel like guilty for it. But like if I'm listening to like a book on like audiobooks or whatever, or Audible from like Amazon or whatever, then I feel guilty if I like just like stop at like a chapter or something like that, because I feel like someone's telling me a story and I feel like I'm being rude. I know it's weird because it's like, oh, it's audiobook. You can literally just pause it whenever and pick it back up. But yeah, anyways. So after that, I kind of went on the comedy binge. Like I just put on a couple of stand-up comedy shows and stuff like that, just to put me through. I saw like one or two. I don't know why, but I went to Dane Cook because I just remember the monkey story where it was like the heist monkey, which still like that's like what, 12 years old maybe, like 2005 I think, 2006, 11, let's say 10 years old. But that shit, I still find that funny. Yeah, but that was like 10 minutes of that because I can't deal with Dane Cook for long periods of time. And then like I just started looking for like podcasts to like listen to. But the thing is, I didn't want to listen to like any serious podcast, like Serial or anything like that, because like I feel like that will devote more of my like attention to like listening to that, and because Serial's a really good podcast. I've heard a lot of good things about it, and I've listened to like the first episode. I think there's only like 7 too. I listened to the first one like not a long time ago, but a while ago, and not for nothing, it was really interesting. But that's something that I need to like focus my attention more on, and I'm a little bit drowsy, so I can't really do that. So I was looking for at the last rest stop when I filled up on gas. I was looking for like a funny podcast or something like that, something like lighthearted or like just something to like play in the background, so it's like it'll keep me up and I don't have to focus too much attention. I don't know, for me it's always like comedy. It's like a specific part of your brain that I don't want to say like you don't have to like devote your entire mind to it, because that doesn't sound right, but you only have to devote like partial attention to it, because you can get a joke by like peripheral hearing. I cannot speak. But like something like Serial, where it's like more serious, and like I feel like you have to devote more of your like attention to it. But I don't know. But I just found a great podcast, which is How Did This Get Made? It's pretty much just about like not terrible movies, but like B movies or like even C movies, and they're just talking about like how specifically they got made, even though they're like terrible. Like the one I listened to was about the Wild Wild West. I remember watching that as a kid, and I was like, so like I want to see this, and when I was a kid, I was like, oh, this is great. I didn't realize how bad of a movie it was, because I was like 6 or 7 when it came out, and like I watched it when I was like 6 or 7 when it came out, and it's not a good movie. And I remember knowing it's not a good movie because I rewatched it like maybe a couple years ago, and it's just terrible. And the story behind like how they made it is just basically the whole point of like the giant, because in the movie Wild Wild West there's a giant spider, like a mechanical spider, like that comes out of like nowhere for no reason other than like someone wanted to have it in the movie, which is funny because that concept was originally for the Superman movie that was supposed to come out, that they were supposed to make back in like the early like mid 90s or whatever, with Nicolas Cage. It was literally supposed to be the villain of that movie, like was supposed to be a giant spider. I think it was controlled by like Brainiac or something like that. And it was funny because that movie got scrapped, and like I don't know, like there's the photo like Nicolas Cage with like long hair and like the Superman suit, and it looked terrible. But there's a whole like other backstory for that. But anyway, so the I think the director or like the person who was like the producer or something like that really wanted like a giant spider. So when he took over the reins for like the Wild Wild West like movie, he took it only on the condition that he can put the giant spider in it, and that's why there's a giant mechanical spider that comes out of nowhere at the end of the movie. And I just found that so fucking hilarious, because it's a giant spider. And I remember watching it as a kid. I was like, oh my god, this is so cool! It's a giant mechanical spider, like steampunk or whatever. And I didn't realize like how like just how terrible that premise was. Because like I was a kid, I didn't realize. As a kid, I didn't know what movies were like good. I was like, oh, just fighting, explosions, like story doesn't matter. Like as long as it's funny and there's like jokes and stuff like that, I'd laugh. But it's just not a good movie, and it's so hilarious. But the next one I want to watch, next podcast I'm gonna listen to is what was it? About Time Cop. It's John Claude Van Damme movie from like 90 something, 94, 95 I think, where he plays like a time cop. And like I started listening to the podcast, and the first thing that got to me was like, oh, it's they give the description of the movie. It's like, oh, it's a time travel movie made in 1994 that takes place almost like entirely in 1994. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be good. Because I remember, because again, Time Cop is one of those movies I saw when I was a kid, and again, looking through like kid glasses and stuff like Kid Site or whatever, I'm like, oh, this is a great movie. But it's one of those B horror movies that you watch for fun, just to have a like quick laugh at like how silly it is. So, but I haven't seen it for like a long time. I think the last time I saw it was when it was like on basic television on like a Sunday, like a lazy Sunday or whatever, and like I just have it on TV and stuff like that because there's nothing else to watch. And I think maybe that was like more than like 15 years ago when I saw that. So I was a little bit older, and I still had like I had like teenage glasses at that point in time. So I was like, oh, it's still a pretty good movie. And like just looking back at it with my memory, it's like, oh, I don't think it was actually. But so I think what I'm gonna do when I get back is watch a couple of these old B-rated horror movies. Not horror movies, B-rated movies. Although like I really wish there was like some way like I can just delete my memories of specific movies so I could relive them again and again, like some of my favorite movies of all time. Like I do that with The Thing. Like honestly, like I watch The Thing every Halloween. Like not even like joking. Like that's one of my go-to Halloween movies, and I make sure to watch it like on or like around Halloween, depending on like what I'm doing on Halloween. But it's just so good because I always forget specific characters who are the Thing. So when it happens, it kind of catches me off guard. Like I know like the last person who becomes the Thing and the first person that becomes the Thing, but in between there, it always gets hazy throughout the year because I'm thinking about other stuff, so it doesn't pop in my memory. I just love that movie. And Kurt Russell, oh my God, Kurt Russell's the man. I really, there's a special place in my heart for Kurt Russell. I mean, he was my go-to like action hero hero. There you go. I don't know why that was so complicated for me to say, but yeah, because I remember him from like Big Trouble in Little China, which I recently rewatched because it came on Netflix like maybe like a couple months back, and oh, it still holds up because it's the funny thing about Big Trouble in Little China that I find hilarious is that the entire premise of like the entire movie is so brutally like insane, and everyone in the entire movie just goes with the premise of like all this stuff that's happening, and the only person who's like calling BS or like just being like, is this shit really happening, is Kurt Russell's character. And I'm like, yeah, he's the only sensible person in the entire movie, because everyone's like, oh, okay, there's fucking like a ghost who wants to kidnap like women with green eyes because if he marries her, he can come back to life and like rule the world with like his army of like undead or army of like ghosts, or I don't remember the exact premise of it, but it's like everyone just goes with it. Even people who are like you think would be the skeptical ones, like it's based on like China, like I think it's Chinese like mythology or whatever, and all the Chinese people in the movie are like, oh, they believe in it, so okay, that makes sense. But then like people are like reporters or like journalists or anything like that, they go with it like instantly. They're like, oh yeah, it's totally believable, that's exactly what's happening. I'm like, what? No, there's like, you don't have any skepticism like at all. And Kurt Russell's the only person, literally, he's a truck driver that just happens to pass through and get involved in this entire situation. And it's just a great movie. That's a movie I gotta actually rewatch whenever I get the chance. Oh man, now like just thinking about it, like there's so many movies that I want to like watch again. like I have to watch what's the name of this movie? V for Vendetta, because I like, again, that's one of my annual movies that I always watch. I always watch it like around the 5th of November. And this year, this year I completely forgot about the 5th of November. It was a Sunday, so like it didn't really click in my head. And like, yeah, it's actually ironic too. It's like remember the 5th of November, and I literally forgot about it. So I got to rewatch that one, because that's one of those movies that for me always changes like my perception on life the older I get. Because I remember the first time I saw it was maybe when I was like 17, I think, when it first came out, like in theaters and stuff like that, or 16. And that, like, I was like, oh, it's like a comic book movie, so I'll watch it. And I didn't really get the whole like concept behind it, or like the whole like the ideology that I was trying to like put out there, because like I was just a kid. I was a teenager, but I was like still in that mindset of like, oh, like comic book movies, like superhero movies, like just like all this like action pieces or whatever, not like story driven movies. And like the action in the movie is far and in between. Like they're great, and it has like a whole bunch of like quotable moments. But for me, as I get older and I rewatch it like every once in a while, like it's only been recently that I've been watching, like I watch it every year, because I want to see like what my views and stuff like that on the movie, and like what it's talking about, the message it's trying to get across, like how that changes with me. And like I saw it again when I was like 20, maybe like 3 or 4 years after I first saw it. I was like, oh, okay, I get the story more, like what it's trying to put across. And then I watch it again, like maybe like 4 or 5 years later, when I'm like 24. Oh yeah, when I was 24, like 4 years later. And then that's why I started watching it every year, because then I realized like, oh wow, okay, like when the movie first came out, there was a whole bunch of controversy because the main protagonist is basically a terrorist. Like he does terrible things for his own sense of justice, or his own sense of like what is right in the world, like what should be changed, but he does it through terrorist means. He blows up like the Old Bailey, and then he wants to blow up Parliament. And the whole controversy was this, because I think it came out in 2006, if I want to be exact. And this was like a couple years after like 9/11, and like terrorism was like, the threat of terrorism was so big, and the main character is a terrorist, so there was a whole bunch of controversy, which is why it didn't like do well at the box office when it came out. It was because everyone was like, oh, it's like promoting terrorism, it's like, oh, you're so, like the movie like glorifies terrorism and like as like a noble act or whatever, which I can understand like how, like where people are coming from. And like, yeah, terrorism is terrible. Like, yeah, terrorism is terrible. That's why it's called terrorism, because you're doing something to terrorize the population into like fearing and changing, like to change through fear, which isn't how you should go about like changing people's views. But in the movie, suffice it to say, like the movie puts it as like the only way to get people to change is to instill that fear. But what the movie does, and what the movie construes, is that it doesn't put the fear on the people, essentially. It puts the fear more on the government. Because the government's like a totalitarian, like socialist government or whatever. I can't remember, yeah. Totalitarianism, I think. But the whole premise of the movie was that he wanted to get revenge personally, but he masked it by like causing fear into the hearts of like the members of the government, not into the members of the people, because he spoke directly to the people, saying that like, you know, there's something wrong with the world, you know, there's something wrong with the government, you know that everything is not right, and you just choose to blindly follow, which is an important message, because you can't just blindly follow your government. You have to question. That's what democracy is. Again, this is a totalitarian government, so you can't really do that. But you know, the people have the power, even if they don't technically have the power. So it's really weird, because as I get older, I'm like, I understand the message, because it's more of confronting what's wrong in the world. And in the movie, what's wrong in the world just so happens to be that the government is shitty. They do things, they ban things because they feel like it's not right, when it's not up to them to do that. Like, they do that with certain religion, like people's like sexual orientation and other things like that, and it's just terrible. That's like how did the world get to that point? And the reason why it's so like well done is because they portray the government as realistically as they could, as in like, how do totalitarian governments come into being? And most of the time it's because of fear. Like, the people are afraid, so they give up their freedom for the sense of security, which I can understand that. Like, people want to feel secure, but freedom is freedom. Like, you have, like, going back to the audiobook that I listened to earlier, it was World War Z. It's a really good book, actually. Way better than the movie. I didn't read it before I watched the movie, so I didn't see the reason why the movie was so hated, like not hated, but why the movie wasn't like, everyone was like, oh, it's not faithful to the book, and like there's no possible way they can do it faithful to the book. I understand, because the book is just a series of interviews that this guy does after the entire like zombie war, and is just asking people like what do you remember about the war, what do you remember about before, like the outbreak infection. And there was one thing where it was there was one like passage in the audiobook and also in the book, which I remember reading first before I re-listened to it. It was talking about how in Cuba's like a communist country, and after the entire outbreak, Cuba became like a hub for like refugees and stuff like that from America that were trying to like flee and go to like an island, because the island's secluded and there's no way that other infected can come to the island, so you just have to make sure you pacify all the infected on the planet, all the infected on the island. So I remember one of the interviewee, who was I think French, who was like trapped in Cuba at the time, and then ended up becoming like a major political party after Cuba went democratic, because the people of Cuba in terms of the people of Cuba, they're all under the rule of Fidel Castro in the book, which I'm not sure if they still are, because I'm not really up with current events, but I think he passed away and he passed it over to his brother, but that may have been like a couple years ago, so I haven't really kept up with it. Anyways, that's beside the point. The whole point was that once I don't want to say, oh, like the American people like brought freedom, but essentially they did, just because they were fleeing from America to come to Cuba to start a new life, which is really kind of funny. And at first, the Cuban government put them into like prison camps, essentially, to keep them separated from the general population of Cuba, because Cuba was thriving. They were the hub of like agriculture and like food production and all this stuff, and they just like were just really set in stone as like a world power at this point in time, like during like the entire like infection, before even the war started, to like fight back for humanity. So after a while, it was like there's millions of foreigners, and not just Americans, but like other people from like South America, Central America, like Canada, United States, even from like Europe and stuff like that. That went there to try to like escape like the zombie, to escape everything, and just like kind of like start a new life, essentially, and feel safe. But after a while, their population, like the numbers grew, and after maybe I think it was like 2 years or 3 years, there was like 5 million foreigners, like in these like prison camps, essentially, and they'd just be like, they'd be fed and stuff like that. They'd be like kind of humane, but they would be like working like 12-14 hour shifts of like just manual labor. And after a certain point, it was like it's less cost efficient to just have them integrate into the Cuban society, because to put all of them into like these prison camps, essentially, and then like have like personnel like man them, like how many people, like how many like personnel do you have to like to watch over 5 million people? Like that's a lot of resources that you're just giving up. So the French guy who you're interviewing was at the time head of like a sector of the government, where he basically I think he told Fidel Castro about like, oh, like what you can do is have 10% of those 5 million people be allowed to work and like gain jobs outside of those prison camps and actually work in the Cuban society, and they'd be paid like less than minimum wage and stuff like that, just enough to like get by, but they'd get like a point system for the amount of hours they work. So, and with those points that they gain from like every hour they work, they could use that to buy essentially the freedom of someone else in the camp. So after like 5 years, the entire camp was disbanded and they integrated with the Cuban society. Again, it's still like a communist. I was gonna say socialist. It's still a communist rule under Fidel Castro, the dictator, right? But what happened was that all these refugees that were integrated into life and they were like calm, after a while, like, you know, they started whispering and started like not revolting like up front, but like sowing those seeds. You know, sowing those seeds of like, oh, like we should have more freedoms and not just like be ruled by a dictator. And so after a while, it was just like, oh, it was essentially like not terrorism in the sense, but it was essentially like, oh, they're planting this seed of doubt into the government that the Cubans at this point in time in the book they hadn't known, because again they've been under communist rule for mostly for like the entire lives. So when they started integrating with like Americans and like Canadians and all these other countries that had democracy originally, but the democracy kind of failed them essentially because, you know, they weren't prepared for the zombie like outbreak. And so after a while, it was like Cuba became a democracy, and with that, it was like a change. But what the French interviewee was saying really caught my attention, because it was like, oh, like freedom is all well and good, but you know, you can't just have freedom. You have to have a specific thing you want, something you want in your life, and then you have to have the will and the strength to fight for that freedom to have that. So that really caught me, like, oh, like that's what freedom is. Freedom isn't like, oh, I want to be able to do or say whatever I want. Like, it's the freedom to follow your dream, essentially, your passion, which I found like really inspirational, because it's like that's what freedom is. But a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people don't like realize that that's what freedom actually is the freedom to follow your dreams, follow what you want in life. You know, so that really got to me. And then there was another thing where it was about like after the fall of the United States, everyone was like left in their own like zones east of the Rockies, like the Rocky Mountains, and then the government was pushed all the way to like Hawaii and then west of the Rocky Mountains, because the Rocky Mountains were like a great like natural defense against the zombies, because they couldn't necessarily cross the mountains easily, so it became a defense. But what was really cool was that it showed what like the United States is, because the president at the time was like, oh, we have to have an election, and his vice president at the time, or his running mate at the time, was like, why do we have to have an election? We should have like just a governmental power, like Congress should take over or something like that, or the Senate should take over, like, and have complete control for however long they need until we get this under control. But the president at the time was like, no, we can't do that, because again, this is America, like, where we don't have the luxury of like other countries who have had thousands of years of history, to have the people in that country, like, I don't want to say loyal to the country, but like to have faith in their country. Because he was mentioning like, oh, like how like Pakistan or like England or like Russia or any other country in the world. They've been a country for thousands of years, and they have that loyalty. They were born there, they were raised there, their grandparents were born there, their great-great-grandparents, for as far as like as long back as you can as history is recorded, like their family has been there. So the whole reason like they were able to keep some sense of like pride in their country was not because of like, was simply because of loyalty to their homeland, which I can understand. Like again with like the Queen of England, like she wouldn't leave like back in World War II, where the Queen wouldn't leave England during the Blitz when the Nazis were like just bombing the hell out of London. She wouldn't leave because that's her country, and that's really like wow, like, and people would sacrifice their lives for their country, but it's for national pride. It's pride of their homeland, pride, and like wanting to protect their home, which is like, it's amazing to think about that people are willing to do that. But the problem with America, the problem with the United States, is that we're a fairly new country. Like, I don't want to say like, yeah, I mean, we are a fairly new country. We haven't even been around for 300 plus years, and not even just that, but we're like, not to use like old like U.S. history terms, but like we're a melting pot of different races, different countries, different cultures, different ethnicities, different everything. So we don't have the luxury of like, oh, national pride, because a lot of the people in the United States don't have that for more than like a generation or two. Most of the people in the United States are immigrants. There's not that many people who can like trace their lineage past like 100 or 200 years. Like, there are a good amount, like there are a couple million, but like America's 380 million people strong, or yeah, 380 million. No, I don't remember. Like 400 million. It seems about right. And like most of them can't trace their lineage back in America for more than 100 years. So what pride do they have in America? What's keeping them there, or not keeping them there, but keeping them like fighting for America? You know? So that was the whole problem. That's why there was like, oh, we have to have an election. We can't just become like a totalitarian. We can't become like a monarchy or a dictator, like elect like a king. Because again, like in history, a king was essentially a person they put in power to protect the realm, to protect everything he ruled over. And that's basically how like the monarchy started. It wasn't elected, but it was someone who took over to protect everyone else, and then his line just continued down the road, and his blood became royal, essentially. But in America, we don't have that. We've had a democracy since our inception. So it's not like England, where they were a monarchy up until a certain point until they became